Hey guys, it's Mstarka, and I wanted to talk a little bit today actually about the different parts of the land that we need to know about when we talk about ancient Egypt. We're going to talk about the geography of Egypt, and specifically the way that the Nile River affected the geography of Egypt. So, first thing to know here is that the Nile River is over 3,500 miles long. It's ridiculously long. And interestingly enough, it actually flows north. It starts down in Central Africa, and then it flows northward, which for us in the United States probably seems a little weird. So here we have the Nile, and if we're going to just kind of go along as we do this, I'd like you to take a blue, and I'd actually like you to outline the Nile here. So the Nile River is really what allowed the Egyptian civilization to succeed. Much like when we were talking about Mesopotamia, this is another river civilization where the river was their source of water. It allowed them to succeed and really prosper, to have civilization and have those 8 features of a civilization, because they were able to have prosperous farming, which we're going to get to in a minute. So here we have the Nile River. Another thing that we're going to talk about just here is what we call the delta. And the delta is basically where a river it fans out and separates into different little pieces, little tributaries. So the Nile Delta, it's where the river fans out. It has many streams and marshy areas. The land through here is very water heavy. And it's created by all of the silt deposits, like all these giant silt deposits in this area that make it really fertile and really, it really just treats the soil in through this part. So because it's so fertile, we're actually going to color in just this little section here in green. So these are things that we're probably a little bit more familiar with. Here though, we're going to get into a couple of things that we haven't really talked about, and that's the idea of the blackland and the redland. There are basically 2 different kinds of soil in Egypt here. We have the Kemet, which is the black land, which is this just narrow strip of land on both sides of the river. And it is very fertile. All of that silt, this really rich silt, this really good soil that comes in from the river, deposits along the banks of the Nile River because of the way that it flooded. And it just allowed people to really have this farming area where they had these regular yearly floods that they could more or less count on, that would create this fertile area where they could plant and harvest crops. And guys, you'll notice here that I'm using colored pencils. I would not suggest trying to use a marker for this part in particular. If you don't have like a black colored pencil or black crayon, you could even just use like a regular standard pencil for this part. That would be totally cool. We could go ahead and just use like a regular pencil and then just like use the graphite here for that. That would be okay. I wouldn't use a marker or a pen though, because then you couldn't really read the writing. Anyway, so we have the Kemet, and then you'll notice that all out here we have this area that is just desert. It's called the Redland, and basically it's where they have this desert land, the Deshret, which they didn't have the silt built up. They didn't have all of the good farming stuff to let it be able to support life. So the Redland, it's desert land. It's outside of the Blackland. It still surrounds the Nile, but obviously much farther out. And it creates these big swaths of desert that really protected Egypt, actually, because it deterred invaders from wanting to come in and like attack them. I know when we were talking about Mesopotamia, we were talking about the fact that they were always being invaded. They had to create these big walls and things to try and protect them. Whereas Egypt, they had natural protection because people were not wanting to pass through all these deserts. Like the Sahara, the eastern and western deserts, like they kept Egypt safe. So even though it wasn't good for farming, it did kind of serve its own purpose and it was still useful. Last couple things I want to talk here are about the idea of Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. So as I said, the Nile River actually starts in the south and then flows north. So upriver would actually be Upper Egypt, which is farther south. So it looks like it's down on our map, even though it's Upper Egypt because it's upriver. Upper Egypt was closer to the source of the Nile, and so it's down here. We also have Lower Egypt, which was further up here, kind of near the delta and the mouth of the river, so it was downriver. Upper Egypt was upriver, Lower Egypt was downriver. So a couple of different parts of Egypt here that I wanted you to look at, I wanted you to kind of get a sense of. So I hope this helps.